Hey guys, for my research project, I did the rise of the Baptists in the South Carolina upcountry and the Great Awakening of the 1830s. And so, what I'm going to try to do is go through, give you some general information about Baptists in general, and then how they migrated to the South, then specifically how they migrated to South Carolina, and then some of the events that occurred, particularly events in the upstate in the 1830s. And so General Baptists, so they were called general because they believed in general atonement, so salvation possible for everyone. Regular Baptists or particular Baptists only believed in predestined elect, and so Calvinists in their beliefs. Separate Baptists, so this is a truly American version, so general and regular both really came from the English tradition, and separate Baptists were sort of an American creation. So they were heavily influenced by George Whitefield. They were emotional, evangelical. They had 9 rites. Not all separate Baptists followed all 9 of these. And so they included baptism, Lord's Supper, love feast, laying on of hands, washing feet, anointing the sick, right hand of fellowship, kiss of charity, and devoting children. And so, like I said, not all of them had that. So most separatists were modified Calvinists, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And we're called revival folk, sometimes called New Lights, and were known as separates. First Baptists in South Carolina. There are really 3 migrations of Baptists into South Carolina. And so, surprisingly, the first appearance of Baptists in the southern colonies was in South Carolina, so in Charleston. And so, the regular or particular Baptists of Charleston, who were Calvinist, some sources have them in Charleston as early as 1693. Also had some General Baptists in the Charleston area too, and there was some conflict between the two. A second migration was the Welsh Baptists from the Welsh Tract in Pennsylvania. They came to the Pee Dee region, which is on the North Carolina border, in 1736. And evidence suggests that they were General Baptists. And then separate Baptists, which came into the upcountry, the backcountry. I haven't found a distinct time frame when that changed from the backcountry to where it was no longer a backcountry, but was considered the upcountry. And so for the purpose of this project, I'm going to consider it the upcountry. And so these were the Baptists that came into the backcountry or the upcountry. Shubal Stearns was a Baptist in the Northeast, and so he felt led to move to the South to start churches. And so his first stop was in Virginia. That didn't work out as planned. He ended up in North Carolina, not far from the Virginia line, and started Sandy Creek Baptist Church. And Sandy Creek Baptist was really the center for mission work to South Carolina, Georgia, other parts of North Carolina, Tennessee. And so his church really started a lot of the Baptist churches in the upstate of South Carolina, originated from members of Sandy Creek Baptist Church moving here and doing church plants. So the first Baptists in the upcountry of South Carolina, they were separate Baptists, first came in 1759 and quickly spread over the entire region. They grew out of the Great Awakening and were Ulster Scots, Scotch Irish, whatever you want to call them. A lot of those fell into those ranks. They were a good fit for the backcountry because they did reject a lot of creeds, paid little attention to formal doctrine, and so they were really, denomination for the common man in the backcountry or upcountry. So brought greater urgence in evangelism and missions, very into revival, a deep belief in the Holy Spirit, emotional, egalitarian, and so once again playing into the common people in the backcountry, played well into that. So Baptist relations in the States And so you had these different sects of the Baptist faith. And so eventually they're going to merge into one with indistinguishable characteristics. And so Stearns and his Baptists on one hand, and then you had this Philadelphia Charleston connection of the regular Baptists in the lower part of the state. Eventually, their doctrines are going to merge, and they're going to become an effective blend of the two. And so you gain a lot of the characteristics of the two. And so followers of Stern help bring into the practice evangelism more so than the regulars. And so the confessional detail of the regulars help give expression to these theological conviction of the separates. And so there was a back and forth and both benefiting or both contributing. And so much of this unity came from, which I'm going to get into in a minute, this missionary and primitive Baptist schism and the formation of the SC Baptist Association, and then also Furman College and Theological Seminary. And so a lot of these were based on the efforts of Richard Furman, who was from the lower part of the state. Southern Baptist Theological Seminary was in Greenville, founded in 1859, but then moved to Louisville, Kentucky in 1877 for various reasons. South Carolina was, destroyed after the war, didn't have any money, and so Kentucky offered money and a campus to entice them to come up, and they did. And so that's where the seminary is to this day. You also had this primitive and missionary Baptist conflict, and so this wasn't necessarily between the three that I've mentioned before, and so this creates sort of a new classification. So you've got the old school, which is the primitive, and the new school, which is the missionary. And so they didn't correspond to a particular sect like the general or the regular. Really, any Baptist sort of fell into one of these two trains of thought. So primitives considered that other Baptists should not do the new measures, which we talked about with Finney and these revivals, to promote or try to get emotion that was not authentic. And so they were not into missions, and so they were really anti-mission oriented. And then you had obviously missionary Baptists, which were really into missions and spreading the gospel, and there's various reasons of why both of those held those beliefs. And so washing feet, and so as I was going through the Baptist records, this is something that came up, and it connected in with as I was learning about the primitive Baptists and the missionary Baptists, and so I thought that interplay was interesting. And so that was one of the separate Baptist traditions, was washing feet. And so as you have this unity coming, and so these churches coming together, you have one giving in one way and one giving in another way. And so you had this particular church that's listed here. And so in their records, it's showing that the separate traditions, primitive beliefs, church members agreed that washing each other's feet at the next meeting. And so compromising and giving that to the separate, because the separate were given in other ways. So it became a topic for many Baptist churches trying to bridge this divide. And so this is from Standing Springs Baptist Church. And so the church, again, to consult on the ordinance of washing of feet. And so this is something that I saw several times going through these church records of these various Baptist churches from the upstate. And so it was a topic that was brought up. So the Great Revival of 1830, this is part of the Second Great Awakening. You see the Saluda Baptist Association grew from 999 white and black members in 1831 to 1 year later, 2,507 people. And so that's just a phenomenal growth. And so you had the Reedy River Baptist Association next door, which went from 1,500 to almost 2,500. So this is part of a larger revival movement in evangelical denominations north and south. For South Carolina Baptists, this revival of the 1830s was much more impactful than the one that happened around 1800, 1801. And possible explanations that were cited, who knows, but nullification crisis, a cholera epidemic, but a lot of it was the foundation that a lot of these, and hard work these pastors and church planners did to be able to provide the framework for this revival to be able to take place. So I'm going to go through some of the records that I found, going through the church records and church minutes, and just looking at some of the great growth that I noticed, especially in 1831 and 32, just like the research showed. And so Brushy Creek Baptist, July 1832, great number came forward. Congregation today was perhaps the largest ever known in the district. Brushy Creek in 1831, and so 20 came forward. Friendship Baptist, September 1832, 18 by experience. And so you got to think, well, 18 people, well, this is just 1 month, and this is a small country church in what was the back country. It was turning into the up country as more people moved in. November, December 1832, 21 received at Friendship. Fort Shoals Baptist, 25 by experience on January 2nd, so 1 service. Mount Zion Baptist, 27 by experience, March through July 1832. Unity Baptist, so 52 received by experience from May 19th to July 14th. 52 people, so that is a huge number for these small churches. Mountain Creek Baptist, which is in Anderson in the upstate near Greenville, 25 by experience from January to March. Standing Springs Baptist, so July of 1832 had 32 people received by experience. So once again, a huge number for these small country churches. Reedy River Baptist, 35 by experience from October 7th through November 3rd, 1832. And so what did the impacts of all this have? And so the lasting impacts to the state of South Carolina, which is traditionally known as one of the rocks of Southern Baptist the Southern Baptist denomination. And so the impact of this early claim of the separate Baptists on this upcountry population, which includes a large percentage of the state now, would be responsible for this numerical dominance of the Baptists over other religious bodies in South Carolina in the future, in the 19th and the 20th century. And so it was interesting journey going from Baptist thought in England to New England, and then its struggles as it made its way into the South, and then how it really took hold, especially with this great revival of the 1830s, which was part of the Second Great Awakening, which in some of the other literature it talked about with the Kellison article, that it's very understudied. The Second Great Awakening is well documented in the North, but in terms of the South, it's not very well documented. But there's evidence, as I've seen and I've showed you in the primary documents of these church records, that it definitely had a huge impact in the upstate of South Carolina. So I hope you enjoyed my project. I enjoyed doing it and learning about how these early influences really continue to affect the state of South Carolina today. So thanks for listening, and I will talk to you later.